Tom, thank you again for being here.
Great fun. Really enjoying it, Paul.
Yeah, it's a riot. Actually, we should mention. I mean, I'm not supposed to be selling other sort of stuff, but we are going to have a show at the Guild. You and I and some other people that are from Ives Gammell, so it'll be fun too. Uh, somebody asked me earlier on about the um, the program, the program with Gammell.
Right.
The program.
Right.
First study Bard for 16 years until you can do one of them perfect. That one. You remember that program?
Exactly. No, I have people ask me that question all the time, and what I find interesting is, compared to the way teaching is going on in today's ateliers, Mr. Gammel's was an individual program. It was based on each person's individual progress.
Right.
One person might come in and draw cast for 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Another person might draw for 5 months or 6 months.
Yeah. I remember some of them drawing outlines for 5 months,
right?
Because they couldn't get an outline. No, he would set them away before that. But it was
exactly, and he, in many ways, he's a very misunderstood guy. And there were lots of stories about him being tough and cantankerous, and even to the extent of him holding you back, or not giving you knowledge that would allow you to advance. But
I never saw that.
I never saw that either. And I think one of the stories I have, the great memories I have, was in Williamstown. My first couple of summers, we asked them, can we have a model out of doors? Can we have a model out of doors? It would be the perfect complement to, painting the figure indoors, and painting landscape. The combination of the two.
Yeah.
And he would scowl at us and say, no, none of you are ready. None of you are ready. So finally, myself, David.
Of course, he was running a perfect agenda.
Exactly.
When you're ready. Yes.
When you're ready. So finally, one Sunday morning, Gary Hoffman, David Lowery, and myself, we all got together and we hired a local girl to come up and pose in the side yard of the Williamstown studios. And then all of a sudden, we see this, figure, rushing towards us with a gray smock on and his, rubber gloves, grabbing our brushes and correcting on our pictures.
Right.
He couldn't have been more thrilled that we, took the bull by the horns and took the initiative to, take on the figure. And from that point on, we had a figure on a regular basis. On our own, and he was always there criticizing. So, part of it was that he wanted you to push him too, and take on the challenge that he may say you're not ready for, but he wanted to see that drive come through.
That's a good one. I've often felt there's such a thing as a person who's too good a student, and I mean, there's a word for that. I mean, it's like well behaved.
Right.
You really have to be teaching yourself. You have to be on the page that you need to be on, and a lot of that requires the student to be in a communication with the teacher in the ways like. Well, you probably, I don't know if you were there that day, but I remember one day I came into the studio at the figure and I brought the pastels in, and everybody said, "You're going to hell. You're going to get thrown out of the studio." And so I worked for a number of days, and finally Gammel's ready to show up, and he comes in there and he looks at it. I think he was taken aback a little bit, and he said, he shook his head and he said, "That's way better than it has any right to be."
Exactly. Yeah.
But he didn't say, he didn't pull out the Tommy gun and do any of those sorts of things.
Exactly. No. I think he very much wanted us to do those sort of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't know who you are, where you are, if he doesn't hear any expression.
Exactly.
If he doesn't hear,
a student has to show drive and personality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, when it comes to the Gammell's work, the Twilight of the Hound, I mean, the Hound of Heaven, the imaginative side of Gammell. I mean, I can't tell you for sure that was something I was simply dreaming about. It wasn't actually fully invested. I remember when I was young, wondering where my ideas were going to come from. You can tell with Gammell when he was young. He was rotten with these kinds of storytelling ideas.
Right.
I've never been that guy.
Right.
And the strange thing is, so I was sitting there thinking, well, when will that come? And in the meantime, I knew I had a mission that is to say, to learn to see really well. And that was the first job. If that doesn't come, then it's another thing you wind up doing, and it might be portrait painting or something.
Right.
But it was the same thing. And Gammell. So at one point, I actually did the same thing with imaginative painting. And someone in the studio said, "It wasn't you." He said, "I would think it was you." No, it wasn't you. I said, "Gammell, look at that. You got to be in the studio for 5 years before you can do imaginative painting." And I just did one anyway. And before I knew it, he was giving me very quick advice. He said, here, I want you to take these mantles, these over mantles. So we do drawings of the mantles. We're going to do a painting that fit right in here. And there it was. And I was off and running.
Yeah, and that brings up an excellent point, Paul, because, as a teacher, even though imaginative painting was the thing he truly cared most about, as students, he never tried to make us imaginative painters. Right. He really took an attitude of, if you have a predisposition for it or an interest in it, I'm happy to criticize and I would like to, but I'm not going to force that kind of thing upon you.
Right. And no, it's just deeply based paintcraft. Seeing first and seeing relationally.
Exactly.
And to the extent that you and I dispute whether he's truly a Boston School painter, not truly, we don't dispute it, but he doesn't use it. He uses information about it and ways of working like it.
We'll go with like-minded.
No, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And it's the craft of painting that he was most concerned with. But he comes out of.
It was solid. I mean, it was like just the sheer number of aphorisms.
His greatest desire, as a young painter, a young man, even before he got any training, was to be a decorator. A mural decorator in the late 19th century, early 20th century sense. Yeah. I mean, people like Blatchfield, Edwin Howland Blatchfield, were gods to him. Kenyon Cox.
Blatchfield was still alive, and it amazes me that there's no conversation about Blatchfield to speak of. No letters back and forth like he did with Maxfield Parrish. Do you know anything about that? I don't mean to get into that with you guys out there, but
there is one letter. I have a copy of it. It's from Kenyon Cox's son, Alan Cox.
Yes. No, I've seen that.
He was in communication with.
But the Blatchfield, Blatchfield was way bigger than either one of those Coxes by miles.
Exactly.
It's just a great decorator.
And he admired Blatchfield enormously. I remember our visit to. I think you were there. We went to MIT.
Yes.
To see the great murals there. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, Tom. So our question that has you in the room is from Kofi again. This is part 2. Could you talk about Gammell's Hound of Heaven series and this process for it? We've addressed all the other stuff, the works, information about imagination, constructing figures out of your head, and all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about Gammell's specific process, Tom. Okay.
Okay.
And so I show that quote there. That's everything that Kofi had. And let's go down to the first thing. I'm going to get rid of this computer in a couple seconds, and we're going to show you images right here because we can. But I'm just going to go down to these images. I wish I could just blow them up, but you wouldn't see us. But I want to show you that and Tom, just break into whatever you want. You used to own these 2 pictures here,
right?
Would you remember what that was for? What the name of the picture was that this went to?
Was that for the intruders?
That's the balloon one. Is that the balloon picture?
I believe it is.
I think it is. Let's run down there and look at it. Actually, we got it right here. Oh, I just passed it. Whoops! Didn't have to go that far. Is that the figure? Yeah, okay, that's the figure. So there you are, guys. You're seeing that. I wish I'd put that right here so you can see it really well. But there's that figure.
Well, what's fascinating about it, and this is a great example of showing his thought process for working. If you look at the central figure of the intruder,
right
here, and we go back to the 2 drawings, if you could do that.
Yeah.
You're actually you see the central figure here. And now you see another drawing with a figure behind the
tracing of the previous of that drawing.
So part of his original thought process in designing was to have a figure behind the central figure here.
Right.
But in the final painting, this figure never materialized. Right. So that gives great light on how he proceeded, and how it wasn't a rock solid concept from the very beginning. That he was willing to change.
Yeah.
But I think like most great painters, designers, decorators in history, these concepts for these pictures started on a small pad of paper or a napkin.
All right. A little scribble.
A scribble. Which
some of his scribbles were fairly elaborate.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, let's not do that now because we can't switch screens. But let's finish this discussion. That's a really good point, though.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to point out about this is Gammell. This is back to this question about the rhetoric. This isn't rhetoric. This guy's drawing exactly what he sees. He's got a model sitting there in such and such a light, the lighting that would have gone with every other figure in the painting. This front to left to front.
Exactly.
Lighting. And he would set these models on the floor. If they were higher, he would raise them and place them higher and draw from there. So each one of these things was being drawn from life. And then when he traced this over here, he would have brought in this model, maybe been the same model, put the
Right.
mask on him, and had the guy pose, and he would just ignore the parts he didn't have to do.
Right.
But he was drawing this exactly from life.
Right.
It wasn't imaginative. It wasn't made up, and there's no construction drawing in it, by the way. Just so you know.
Exactly. You know, it's completely drawn from life, and it's drawn to be, you know, truthful from the very beginning.
Absolutely. I just want to show you, because this, again, you know, it's just you've seen it, but you can go back in your own video, obviously. But it's just kind of, it just does get you right across. And Gammell then would go, I don't know that I ever saw anything what I'd call truly grisaille by Gammell, but, you know, when you're talking about Jerome, his figures were rather like that. And this isn't the former ones. You see the first figures he does in several of these pictures. There's all this drawing of the architecture behind it. It's already in there.
Right.
The figure's then traced on to be the right size in relation to the paint. And then he does this thing that's sort of half-colored. It's sort of semi what it would have looked like.
Right.
And then he involves a color study of it that's obviously he's got models in the room, and he's really bringing life to the color in that. So there is a version of grisaille, but it isn't gray like you see those those Angs.
He's moving towards the truth on it.
He's right there, right? Yeah. So there's this half-truth sort of thing that he does with it, but you might say a limited palette or whatever. But now you're gone to this study by Gammell on the right. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
But no, and I think the whole concept of a grisaille painting is something that's very much misunderstood. You know, it can be part of the planning process, you know, for this kind of imaginative picture. You know, simply because someone might not feel necessary to go to, you know, full color, you know, in the early stages of development. But this might be a perfect time to...
Well, not yet, but let's keep that in mind. Yeah. We're going to cover this.
Okay.
But that, you can just refer back to it. But that drawing you're looking at right there is in that class.
Right.
There's something that's fully evolved in a gray value.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you'll see that with any mural painter, for example, with Puvis or whatever. You'll see fully, the figures all carefully placed and the whole thing finished rather in front of you.
Right, right.
But this is just another drawing from a different picture, and you can see what he's doing. It's just a painting, drawing from life. This one here, I mean, I don't know to whatever extent he actually did this. I think it's a fairly early one, but nevertheless, here's a figure that's much more fully developed than the stuff behind it. I'm guessing that all this stuff had been traced on there, and it was blocked in, so the values were there, and you could see it. And then he actually just began to work on this figure one at a time, which is one of those characteristics of imaginative work. You can't do it like an impressionist. And I want to get back to what Kofi is saying, because this isn't rhetoric. This isn't impressionism. Right. It's use of using the eyes. Yeah. And Gammell would usually say, if you're drawing from life, you're in a sense, you're an impressionist. And Monet said every artist really is an impressionist on some level. Well, yeah, if you're drawing from life, of course you are.
Yeah, and he has to draw from life, and he has to take, you know, the truths from life.
Right.
You know, to convey his theme in his design.
Yeah. So, but you can see it worked up. And so this would be another model where I don't know to what extent this is the finished color for this thing. But that's where you don't even see a color scheme here. And I'm not sure what that means. We'll have to talk about that later on as we go further on.
But I think really the main point is that he felt the most logical way to learn how to paint these pictures and how to execute them was by using the vehicle of the Boston School and the knowledge of how to paint from life, nature.
Oh, no, the ability to render what you see.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's fundamental, though, to everybody. And he'll say that himself in his books. He'll say that there's no way you get out of this.
Right.
You can't be an impressionist and not know how to see, but you can't be an imaginative painter and just make stuff up. You have to actually, if you want to be in the competition.
Right.
You have to actually have these skills.
Yeah. Exactly.
The ability to see and to see relationally.
Exactly.
The very definition of seeing is to see relationally.
Exactly.
We have to get Dan to bring us that other picture of mine over there whenever he can get around to it. And because I'll talk about that just in a couple seconds. I think we're finished with this phase, though, Tom. I don't think we need to do any more stuff here. All right, so I'm gonna go sort of shut the book on this, but I need to do a couple stunts. Well, so you can. If you want to talk about that, but anything you want to do while I try to figure out how to get rid of this.
Again, this relates to my opening story about Mr. Gammell and his process of teaching, and you know how he would handle each student's development. Paul, you know, is very interested in decoration and design, especially design. Those of you that have taken his composition class know that. But there was the thought that presenting Mr. Gammell with this kind of an interest, he might hold you back and keep you from working on it.
Yeah.
But tell them the story about how this came about.
Yeah, well, that one. So when he were doing the first one I did was Jason the Golden Fleece. He actually gave me, assigned me.
Right.
He said you could come up with something, but I'm going to assign something.
I remember that.
Yeah, but he had made me first draw out, and he gave me these panels, these photographic. No, they were architectural drawings of mantelpieces. I could pick whatever I wanted.
Right.
And so I picked one and did all the drawing for it, which is fascinating in itself. Now, but and so then he said, now we're going to work up, and then he specifically talked about taking a brown paper, like you see, and you're going to show, a brown paper, a shellacked brown paper, and just get the right rectangle, and start smudging some values around.
Right. Right.
There's nothing in mind but to smudge some values around. I was totally in confusion. What the heck is that smudging values around stuff?
Right.
So, but you might say it's the beginning of spotting, right?
But thinking in terms of the architectural elements of the room,
right.
and making those smudges work.
Oh, absolutely.
In conjunction with the architecture.
Yeah, and this one here, I actually created But in this one, there's no glare on this, right? That's pretty good. If there,
it's fine now.
but yeah, we got to watch out for tilting up.
Right.
But I was afraid of that because I've done it before for these poor viewers. But this one had I actually created a frame that had an arch in it, like you see with some of those guys, the Laytons and stuff. And but this is a design that was Apollo. It was Apollo, and there's a story that has to do with the shepherdess of Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually turned it into an American Indian one. So I gave this guy a bow.
Interesting.
And made this an Indian girl.
Interesting.
But I did, at the time, I actually sculpted. You recognize this? Gammell owned that.
Yeah.
You remember that sheep?
I do.
It was in for.
No, I painted it. It was it was the porcelain. I remember that. Yeah.
Well, the rest of these. Oh no, it wasn't the porcelain one.
Oh, what?
Oh no, it was actually a cast of Caproni.
Oh,
I
do remember that.
Remember that? Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, but then the rest of them, I went out and had some friends up north who had goats in New Hampshire, and I went and drew in their field the moving goats. I mean, talk about a nasty moving target. You had to use your memory for that one.
Right.
But nevertheless, he would take you from one step to the other. So all these were drawings that were then pieced together in this thing that already had a spotting idea, the distribution of spots. Yeah. So that was the whole story. We never went much further because my career ended abruptly for various interesting and amusing reasons. Some not very amusing, but I did want to mention before we get any further, and then we can start looking at your stuff, Tom. This is the book that's worth your time. You can find a copy online, but it's The Hound of Heaven, and you can have your own shots. These are fairly nicely reproduced, and there's a lot of information, and a lot of it. This was done in concert with.
The major
Gammell was
exhibition.
alive, yeah. And it was done in concert with this woman Boardman. So she was there and knew him, and this conversation is not. It's very important. You want to understand what this guy was doing. It's really important.
Very much so.
Yeah, and of course it covers the information in The Hound of Heaven. There's several quotes that have to do with the poem and Francis Thompson's thinking and Jung.
Right.
The whole thing about Jung and the psychology, the psychological aspects was a huge thing.
I mean, just about every aspect of his imaginative work, comes from a Jungian perspective.
On that part, you certainly would want to say that probably did come because he came across that because of his what you call his nervous breakdown.
Right.
And so he probably had a top class, maybe a Will James type of psychologist,
right.
to go and meet with.
Interesting.
And so the connection between Jung and all that stuff, and he was going to read it.
Right.
By the way, Gammell tells a very funny story. Do you remember it? He said I was in the Tavern Club, and he said, and I started spouting off about. He probably didn't use that phrase, but I started spouting off about Jung and what Jung meant. And this guy, they said Will James or somebody, but he just looked at him and he says, "You have no idea what you're talking about." Gammell quoted that. He said that, and he said, "I learned that day, though, of course, that you're in your field. You really can't pretend to understand somebody who spent 30 and 50 years in a field.
Well,
you can't think you understand
it's the same thing he would say to Will James if he was talking about painting.
About painting, of course, it's true too.
Exactly,
it's inevitably true.
Yeah.
But that's what protect your turf.
Exactly.
Well, the docents know everything.
Very interesting.
Yeah, Tom, you want to talk
So-
about? Actually, let's do that one because we were onto that for a minute. No, the one over there.
Oh, this one.
Because this is early Gammell.
Yeah, this is.
Let's do the early stuff first, maybe.
This is particularly interesting. This is an imaginative study. It's a preparatory piece for a painting that I'm not sure ever was fully executed. But this is probably after, several smaller drawings, black and white drawings, which he might have done. But this is pre-model stage. So,
Right.
From my knowledge of how he worked and understanding of what he was trying to achieve, if you actually look at this closely, you'll see that there's very little reference, to any human figure, form, animal, figure.
Well, you see a lot of
form.
horse heads.
Yeah, horse heads.
And little sticks to call spears, I guess.
We're not quite sure, what the subject, what meaning it has. It could be Armageddon. I'm not sure.
Well, the Arthurian Armageddon.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some character in the middle here that seems to have an awful lot of presence.
Yeah, exactly.
But here he's already doing this stuff, with this idea of combining like this big pattern, decorative patterns in the middle of it.
Exactly, and you
Very
can see this is from the 1920s. He lived on to 1981. You can see in The Hound of Heaven, where he begins to carry this kind of a theme,
Right.
To a much higher level. The decorative border work,
Absolutely,
on this. Again, always thinking of the rectangle, always thinking of the pattern, the design. This picture, more than being, true to nature in terms of how a figure may be portrayed, he simply, as Paul was saying, he's looking for the big splotches, the big pattern of lights and darks.
And look at this quality of the idea of a center of interest. I mean, and now to us today, we'd probably say that's way too centered, but it's still, the idea is there of powering up a spot, and mastering the center of interest.
Exactly, and this is also, I think extraordinary in terms of, how he develops a color scheme, and his sensitivity to the beauty of color. Regardless of what he's trying to express here, there's certain atmospheric effects. The blueness and the coolness of it, showing a good deal of experience working out of doors in nature.
Yeah. One thing, Tom, about this one is it reminds me of the kids of today who love these imaginative fantasy pictures.
Exactly.
Gammell was that guy. It's a very strange thing.
Yeah. I mean, he was very much ahead of his times.
I've never been that guy. I think I've come honorably to the, as it were, impressionism. But what's fascinated me has always been the truth of color, the truth of things. And not so much the storyline.
Well, and I think that that's clearly what separates this kind of work, because this is nature based, whereas much of the fantasy work today is either computer generated or just made up, or construct, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. This appears to be casein, and I stick my face in it as opposed to oil.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's actually interesting because I never saw him anything like that later on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. He was messing around every which direction.
Right.
A lot of times you look at Gammell and you think he was insecure. In a lot of ways, he feels like he was in the story line. But he did such adventurous things at times. I never did anything like that.
I think
he
he comes off that
30.
way because he truly aspired to something even greater than he was capable of doing.
Yeah. Which is important to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're
and he was very humble. I mean, he considered himself the giants that he worked with, and in Paxson alone, the knowledge that he had of painting, he felt very modest and humble.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's excellent.
Yeah, this is a great example. And just going to a prior step, I think this would be good to look at, Paul.
Yeah.
This is a preliminary drawing for an imaginative piece that developed somewhat. I don't think it actually got to the final painting stage, but this is a drawing which I actually retrieved from a trash bin.
From Gammell's trash can.
From his trash can. But what's fascinating, and we'll look at this drawing again.
Yeah, keep it here. I'm going to keep it next to me. I'm going to hold it next while you see that one.
This is a study, the next stage of development for a composition using this same figure.
Right.
Matter of fact, I remember that model.
Right.
He worked for us as students.
I don't remember. Oh, he wasn't the dancer, was he?
No.
Yeah. So there you are.
So here we are, with these two pieces, and this is, the first stages of development, as a composition in color.
And by the way, this would have been, typically this would have been, I don't know about this one, I don't see grid marks on it, but he typically would do this and grid up the drawing and then.
Yep.
And then
And there's grid marks, that are evident here.
yeah. So this must not have been the final version of that.
I believe he actually did another drawing,
Yeah,
and that
looks
one
like
was
it.
discarded because
Right.
because if you look at it, the poses, well, it's
Pretty similar. Yeah, it's pretty similar.
Pretty similar.
But still, it was so typical of him, though,
Right.
to trace it. And he doesn't have grid marks on this one. By the way, you can do this without grid marks. You can just put them on tracing paper
Right. Exactly.
and easily do the same thing.
Right.
Just trace it on
Exactly.
and do the gridding separately.
But it's fascinating. As I said, I don't believe this was carried to the full extent of a final painting.
Right.
But this, believe it or not, is actually painted on brown craft paper with a coat of shellac on it. And here, 60, 70 odd years later, it's
Somehow surviving.
It survived, and it's in excellent condition.
Yeah. No, we did that with, I don't know what paper he used. Do you use brown paper? 'Cause
we
we
used brown paper.
We used white paper and used brown shellac.
Yeah, we used the charcoal paper with the brown shellac.
Because it gave you a nice tooth.
Beautiful surface.
I was trying to see if this had that tooth. It could very well.
And virtually all of his moderate-sized landscapes, the 12 by 15s, they were all done on
paper?
Charcoal paper, shellac,
Shellac,
which and it's a beautiful surface and beautiful
It really
medium.
is nice, yeah.
And once you lay it down, it's as permanent as the canvas.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, you don't have to be rich to be able to do some of these
Well, and
preliminary
it's
landscapes
great for
and stuff.
traveling too, because you can just put them in a portfolio and
Right.
put them in your suitcase, and he did that especially on his trips to North Africa.
Yeah. He's such a symbolist. I mean, you talk about impressionism, but it's not impressionism. That's a symbol of a sun. It's the bones are looking real and that sort of thing, but it still isn't. It doesn't have the same mission, right?
Right.
And Gammell was very much about posing. Sometimes you do these drama poses. Millet said once, avoid the theater.
Right.
The Gammell did not avoid the theater.
Right.
He was trying to create a pose that would make a great symbol. Of an emotion.
And I think if times had been different, and if the world hadn't been so interrupted by wars and whatnot, if mural decoration still had been in demand during the height of his career, we would have seen these kinds of things on a much larger scale. Decorating public buildings. I mean, that was his true goal as a painter.
Yeah, and the preliminary layer of this, and then who knows what the development would have been. This is that early phase on brown paper. I favor this one that I showed the audience earlier, the predicament.
Right.
With the guy standing there with his arms in the air, and it shows all the struggles, the fears and the dreams and all this stuff. But there's a version on brown paper that's simpler, and I really like it better than the finished one. But the finished one, the articulation of everything is way more finessed. It's way more of a what you'd call Gammell talked about pushing through,
right?
But more of what you call an honest, 19th century realism, where he really studied it up.
And this like the study version of the predicament that you liked. This is at that stage, and had it been carried further, it probably would be much more elaborate and involved.
I think the predicament I saw, and I think it was Childs that had that too, but the picture was about this big. I think it might have been the same size as the painting ultimately.
Interesting.
This might have been too. That might have been the final version size.
But really
good, Tom. Really good. So, by the way, the early stuff. Yeah, you have more on that?
There's a letter on the back. I'm not sure. It's just a certification that it is.
Let's not go there. Let's do Gammell and the methods. Gammell and the processes. One of the things you brought with you that I thought I may as well show for 2 seconds, and thank you for sharing with us. Are these 3 etchings? Gammell did these way early on also, and there's another reason to talk about them now. But you can see, there you go, Tom. Yeah. But you can see that his mind is already around the idea of an intriguing pattern.
Composition, and it shows what an important, element in his work it is. I mean, it was really all consuming.
Yeah. One of the things that he said about his studio is he says, this is to me early, he said, and he said it to you, I'm sure, he said, this is a picture making studio.
Right.
That was not what any of the studios I was ever in before that were.
Right.
You just sat there and painted the model all day.
Exactly.
And if you wound up with a picture,
Exactly.
wasn't that nice?
Yeah.
There was no discussion about composition that I ever heard about anything.
Yeah, you know, whether it was still lifes or a cast drawing or a figure drawing, you know, placement within the rectangle was always, you know, of great concern.
Well, the difference between the idea, like the art students, like I painted figures every day for 3 years, you know, for something less than 3 years, and so you know the whole idea is you develop some serious proficiency in certain aspects of painting.
Sure.
But there was not a word about composition, about pictures, about any of that stuff. Not a word anywhere from anybody. And just that alone tells you something serious about what Gammell had to offer.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a comprehensive thing. And by the way, he's the guy that introduced us to the idea, that Reynolds' idea, that a person who can paint a still life can paint anything.
Right.
The basis of our work was still life because that's where you learn to compose.
Right.
And he would refer sometimes to the model as a potato.
Right.
A portrait model.
Exactly.
Well, that, literally, in terms of composition, that's all it was. You put a potato down and paint it. That's what it got to do with composition. Yeah, you got to get in the right place, about the right size.
It's a smudge of color and value.
Compared to composition of a still life,
Exactly.
the difficulty of it is just not there.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, making a picture, a portrait, has always got its own difficulties, but that's not the same thing compositionally speaking. Right?
It's painting it as if you have no knowledge of what it is.
Yeah.
That's the key to truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Well, here we are with another composition.
I'm gonna check our time. Everybody sees me doing this funny thing. 31. Yeah, we're good, Tom. I'm still good.
Here we are with another composition. I would say this is in the intermediate stage of development as a composition.
Yeah. It's putting it all together on some level.
Putting it all together before, you know, he does the study on shellacked brown paper.
This still has the feeling of that early stuff being drawn like a sponge. This feels a lot like the drawing that's in these.
Right. Exactly.
I wonder if he was evolving that for for an etching, for engraving. Etching. I guess.
I see elements that make me think it probably was going towards a painting.
Well, the figure drawing is not what he eventually could do, and of course these would have been drawn out of imagination, probably almost entirely.
I think in this case they were. You know, there might have been models up here because these figures are much more highly developed than these.
Yeah, which is old school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You always put your figure together. So yeah, if you see, there's a book by Bohm you've probably seen called The Academic, or Strictly Academic. I forget what it's called. That was a show, wasn't it?
Right.
but the academic approach was frequently more intriguing in that phase before you started bringing realism into it.
Exactly.
There's no question about it, because the guy was into his ideas and the expression of his ideas, and it's very the idea of bringing a model in and have it not take over your picture. That's a hard thing to actually achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's all about patterning, all about design. And you know, if the model takes over, then you have a portrait.
You wind up with a certain kind of realism. That's where the impressionist thing is not a benefit to you if you're trying to paint an idea, to paint, what would you say, a psychological concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It has to be subordinate to the overall picture.
Which is what the idealization thing that Hang was such a brilliant character about was about.
Exactly.
And what else do you have, Tom? This is pretty cool. I guess this is that background you were telling me about. We can look at anything you want to.
Yeah, I mean, just go through a few of these studies. I actually might be fun before we go to the drawings if we go to the
that's a good one. Yeah, let's not forget
the Holy Grail. This was.
You have drawings for the Holy Grail or not?
There's no drawings for this, but in terms of composition and understanding his thought process and how he worked, thank you. This is just a marvelous picture. You know,
better keep that a little closer, just a little bit closer. I think it needs to be about here.
As you were
focus look good.
As you were talking, Paul, earlier about the collage.
Yes.
I mean, this is just a marvelous example of, you know, taking his theme, you know, his subject matter, and putting it into just a simple pattern of lights and darks, and you know, a beautiful color arrangement that conveys, you know, what it is he wanted to express.
Yeah, this is so purely decorative. It's so astounding. And by the way, look at that. The idea of the thorns, the briars growing up, and the whole idea of the Holy Grail and that relationship is pretty intriguing. Exactly. Gammell's ideas were fascinating.
And the color arrangement, you know, the magnificent light in the middle, you know, the color of the Grail itself,
Yeah.
and how everything else is subordinate.
Yeah.
But just, from a technical matter, as we've talked about how he proceeded with his studies and preparatory pieces, today people might use fine canvas to do a study like this.
Right, sure.
He did these things on brown craft paper, shellacked.
Yeah.
There is a final version of this on canvas.
Yeah.
It might be aluminum, but it's probably on canvas. It's, very handsome and beautiful. But, this is how he developed his concept, his idea.
Yeah.
And,
the idea of not neglecting a color scheme is a huge one.
But also, the idea that a study or preparatory piece was just that. These were found in, paper, flat files, cabinets. Some of them were dried and cracked and brittle and whatnot. This was a case of it being rescued.
So you mounted this to a canvas, huh?
Yeah. But I think in terms of his late work and this collage type of painting, this is just a marvelous design.
Yeah. The what was I going to say about that? The one point Gammell made when he was talking to us, not so much this picture, but was that you have to actually have some money to be able to make pictures like this. And people talk about the 19th century, and why it went toward impressionism and stuff, and it was because literally you lost the king, you lost the throne, you lost the church, you lost everybody who was previously the patronage was gone.
Right. Exactly.
So people were actually, you might say, relegated, but it also created an opportunity for kids with no money.
Right.
If they had an eye, if they had the sensibility and knew that beauty wasn't about the subject. But the idea that you actually, and Gammell pointed out clearly, you have to hire all these models. You have to get somebody maybe to build you props, and all kinds of stuff to do this stuff well.
Right. And Impressionism, it also opened it up to the masses. You like you said,
good ways and bad ways.
You didn't have to have a lot of money. You just had to have a predisposition for painting. Yeah. And
it's funny how many people in the era today, we're in this new realism era, this photorealism era, don't have a clue what beauty is. It's still, and the realism is the new style. You know what I mean? Realism is not.
Right.
And what is that? Except this noodled up, highly modeled, little tiny inches of.
Well, I think in one of your previous videos, Paul, you made an excellent point that, most contemporary traditional painting today is coming out of the world of illustration. And
you could say that from the point of view of storytelling. But where does this trompe stuff come from? This hyper-realism. I don't even think of that as illustration unless you're trying to illustrate, the tear in the corner of somebody's eye with the kind of this incredibly careful noodling. I mean, what the heck is that? That exercises in something.
It's really a blend of trompe and illustration.
Yeah. Well, that's an odd thing. The illustration part, though, that's the story thing and the dominate seeing, and even in picture making, even in learning.
But this type of painting, Boston School painting at its best with Benson and Tarbell and Paxton, it is a desire to represent the truth and beauty of nature without knowledge of what it is, and much of today's realism is all about what it is.
Making some profound statement, which is again where Gammell sort of encourages.
It's all about painting
a certain kind of thing.
It's all about painting the book with the binding and having the
little piece that's fallen off and
the title of the book on the binding and
gilded onto the binding.
Exactly.
They miss this big thing.
Whereas
it was never done by any great painter before.
And I think you were there
Virtually
too. I think you got a chance to see it also, the Paxton show in Pennsylvania, in Ohio. I mean, Youngstown. The thing I came away from most of all was realizing that all of Paxton's best work was even simpler than I thought. It was extraordinary.
No, and that's a thing that Gammell actually was in constant conversation with us about. It's a huge thing.
Simplicity.
That you miss. Well, it's not just breadth. That word breadth. Simplicity is a perfectly good word, but just it's missing the main point. And realism is not a point of any kind. And Degas said it really well, and I don't know if you've heard that one, Tommy. If you didn't hear it on my thing, you might have heard it somewhere else. But he said that... I wonder what the quote was, because I don't think it was in Gammell's book, but he said, don't you people see, once you've got it all noodled up and all the dots are crossed and the eyes are whatever dotted, you now have the field. When are you going to start making a picture?
Right.
And it's a fascinating question.
It is. It is.
Now I'm paraphrasing
No, but
decidedly.
it couldn't be more to the point.
Yeah.
You know, it's the elimination of detail. It's
It's the use of what major is the most important things in dealing with that, and not getting lost in the thing as a thing, and the literalism as what is that? No, but we're in a time though, Tom, when I don't fault this era because people are trying to get skills back, and that's going to be inevitable in a sense. Yeah,
exactly. It's
and
much
pushing it. Oh, you're getting some skills back. You know,
and it's just like he said. You know, painters of the future, you know, will have to figure it out. And you have to look to the past to figure it out.
Well, and again, that's the beauty of what Gammell had to offer, was that he simply was he was the connective tissue between a bigger era and a better time, and a more knowledgeable time.
Right.
And he had it from multiple sources coming into him,
Yeah.
which is such a blessing. And Gammell was such a rare guy. I mean, I don't know. I mean, even in the conversations you see with Annigoni, you don't get the same sense of the breadth. Annigoni's, Gammell would say Annigoni was the greatest painter of his generation.
Right.
And you don't get the same sense, though. There was a conversation there that had this kind of breadth.
Well, you know what I think it was, and I remember him saying this numerous times when he was writing Twilight of Painting. You know, many of his older painter friends who were, all trained in Paris and, lived through that last great golden age, they didn't really understand what was happening around them. And I think, like the Rudyard Kipling, poem, when everybody's losing their head, you have to be aware that of what's happening. And I think he was the one that was aware.
Losing yours,
why he dedicated his life to, putting together as much information as he can and trying to pass it on.
Yeah, that sums him up. I mean, and so I think we're there. We I think my time is gone, Tom. But no, 3 minutes. So let's just do a sort of a summary though. But Gammell's way of working was he come up with this idea with a scribble, and he apparently had just dozens and dozens of ideas, and he scribbled them all.
Mm.
And what he wasn't scribbling, he was writing about.
But some of these, show though.
As I speak, go ahead and keep showing these. You guys will let people see if you.
Sure.
Yeah, just show them.
These are
make sure there's no glare. I don't know how that's going to work.
A group of drawings from North African sketchbook, and many of these ended up being used in final pictures. The mountaintop here and the castle on the top was actually the initial idea for a very important allegorical picture based on the Holy Grail that he painted.
Yeah.
But at the time of this drawing, he may not have known, that it was going to develop in that way.
Right.
But
that was something that was in the studio, by the way, and that's an example of him having done an idea. Then he did a pastel version of it, and then he did a painted version of it.
Exactly.
So various things.
And the great thing about that, I don't know if you remember, he discovered the pastel in the storage warehouse. It had been done 40 years before, and
I don't know
upon discovery of it, he realized he needed to add one more figure. So 40 years later, he added a figure to it.
You forgot about that one.
Exactly. And then he had David Lowery and I transfer the pastel.
Yeah. You did that
to canvas, and we laid it in for him.
Yeah.
But you can see that this is part of his thought process. Just numerous sketches. North African.
You keep it up here a little bit.
Figures in the landscape.
Now, this one actually makes me want to say one of the things that he said in his own writing. He said, "So to sum it up, what an imaginative painting is you find an architectural background or some kind of background, then you draw some figures in it, and then you figure out what it's about." Exactly. Do you believe he said that?
Exactly.
And I thought that's a liberating thing.
Exactly.
Start with a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
But Tom, that reminds me a lot of when I talk. When I have actually spent time writing poetry, and I couldn't figure out how to write poems until I heard sound, till I saw that it was sound before meaning.
Exactly.
And but it's very much in the same category.
But just some people might call these doodles, but they all could be a spark for an idea.
Oh yeah.
For a larger composition.
This looks like they're influenced by the Orientalists of the
exactly.
Of that age.
Here we go again with that kind of an architectural setting.
Yeah. Yep.
But some of these may look crude and amateurish, but
it's that phase.
It's that phase of the work, and then once
these look like he might have been sketching from people standing there and seeing them in the crowd. Yeah.
And here we are. But
Oh yeah, yeah. Look at
It's that spark, from that
Where'd you
phase.
say it was? Algeria? Where'd you say it was?
North Africa.
North Africa.
Well, actually, this is kind of interesting, Paul. This is
It
gridded
looks
up.
like another one of those etchings.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think it.
Oh, and
this is later.
You've got that camel here somewhere, don't you?
This is probably into the 30s. When he was still traveling. But
Yeah.
what's interesting here
It's
is
definitely pre-Paxton drawing training.
right.
Yeah.
But it's gridded up quite a bit.
Yeah. Totally.
So
Trying to blow it up.
It makes you think that he might have been interested.
But that's
enough.
interesting information, though, for the viewer who wants to know how he painted. We got about a minute left, so but the idea of doing it small and really working it up,
Right.
and then going from there that's fairly standard. Not just for him.
This is one that he's clearly a little more interested in.
Yeah. Well, it's just figures, though. I think he's looking at people here, hanging out over there, wherever it was, North Africa, looking at people, drawing from life. I think that's done from life.
I think so. Yeah.
I do think that. Yeah.
Oh, they definitely are. I remember him telling me they were.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what's
And by the way, he eventually got to the point where he thought, "Oh, there's
the camel.
Hang on to that. I'll pull up the other one. We got to stop. We're past our time, but there it is. Yeah, that's pretty fun. That's pretty fun. Keep that there. Yeah.
That is.
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So he clearly was more interested.
Intriguing. Yeah. He was actually in communication with Maxfield Parrish, and some of these have a little bit of a feeling of the Maxfield Parrish.
They do.
But but that's kind of like the summary, sort of between you and me, just bantering about it.
Sure.
I can't imagine that we missed much. Right?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, and hopefully we've brought a little more understanding of his work and how he thought.
We didn't get too cranky about the present world, right?
That's right.
Gammell was so funny. You take the museum, you spend all your time talking about how bad the lighting and the wall color was. I mean, it was so annoying sometimes, and you thought, I don't think I'm going in this again. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard that. I've heard that.
No,
and the picture's big overcleaned and all this.
Yes.
So there's a certain negativity that would inevitably happen because the world was really not professionally driven anymore. In the old days, the museums would be protected by painters who knew their craft.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in that period during the 70s, that was the first period when, the influence of the Harvard museums had begun to take over the country. Yeah. And he wrote quite extensively on that.
And
there's
the New Deal in painting.
The wonderful essay on
New Deal in
Tastemakers Triumphant, which I'm trying to locate. I don't know if you've...
I don't have that one.
No, it's a marvelous essay. And
do read it, whatever Gammell this is you can find, and I have them available, and Tom probably does too, so I'll send them to anybody who wants them. Tom, thanks very much.
Paul, this was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It was great fun. Yeah. And hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, let's plan to. Yeah. Don't forget to subscribe, share, especially share, guys. Well, subscribe. We're up to about 750 or so subscribers, so it's a thing that's, when there's zillions of people out there, you'd like to see a couple more, but I'm sort of offering to do a live demonstration when we get to 1,000, sort of celebration, and actually paint.
That would
like it in front of people. Yeah. And go ahead and screw it up,
Oh, excellent. So are they notified when you're doing it?
I understand that's what you do. You let people, all your subscribers know, and then do it. Some people try to do it for dollars, and I know that's done, and I could, but but right now subscription really does mean that you get it coming to your house. Right. And so that's a pretty significant thing to have showing up in a number of homes. Usually they're seen by more people than that. Fantastic. So, but anyway, Tom, thank you. And by the way, in particular, thank you for being part of getting me into the Gammell world because, that's, you actually planted my feet on a solid rock.
It's a wonderful life. If we hadn't met, who knows what would have happened.
That's right. This has been delightful.
No, it is.
Thank you.
It's fabulous.
Take care.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.